Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Total Recall podcast, a podcast that is designed for startups, scale-ups, anybody in tech that has an interest in learning and educating themselves in all aspects of the startup community. So on this episode, we welcome Ash Ward, somebody that I've known for a number of years. We'll do a brief introduction shortly, Ash, but it's good to see you. Good morning.
Morning, it's nice to see you as well, Will.
It's been a long time in planning this one, mate, so I'm glad to finally get hold of you and get you on the mic for 35 minutes. So much appreciated indeed.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, it has just been one of those things to try and get organized, but it's good it's finally happening.
Yeah, well, obviously you're a busy man, changing the startup world as you have done for some time. And I think, just to kind of briefly introduce you, obviously you and I started talking some time ago when you were involved in a startup called Twistlock, who were acquired for plus $400 million by Palo Alto, which is now Prisma Cloud. So instead of me stealing your thunder, perhaps just a brief introduction, Ash, to people listening as to who you are and kind of why you're here.
Sure. So, I mean, I was always in operations and enterprises. So I started out life as a Unix admin. So I got to say no to everyone back in the bad old days when we had big Solaris systems and things like that. But I was a Unix admin for a utilities company up here in Scotland, and then moved through various roles and various enterprises, including some financial services and infrastructure architecture. I got bit by the nascent DevOps bug, as it was back then. And then really fell in love with actually providing, I know it sounds a bit silly, but actually providing a direct benefit to the business, as opposed to running my big servers that were maybe 3 steps behind what the business were doing. And that's what led me into financial services, into breaking down monolithic applications and moving them into public cloud. I needed some security tooling for the containerized microservices world I was building out. And I found a stealth company, Twistlock, as they turned out, just as they came out of stealth, and worked with them. And I went, wow, this is how I would do security if I could. And so then, yeah, as you mentioned, I saw they were hiring for someone in Europe. They needed their first technical person in place. And I did my CV and did an email to the CTO, John Morello, dear sir or madam, please find attached, blah, 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 the whole thing. Yeah. And he pinged me back. He went, oh, hey, Ash, it's nice to hear from you. Yeah. Do you want to have a chat? And I had a chat with him. And the next thing I know, he was offering me a job. So yeah, that was then me into Twistlock as the first person in EMEA. We had some sales that was done through a company called Newaware, who were, at that point were amazing. Look and see, great guys. And I was then, they were handling some of the sales function, and I came in as that technical resource. So being able to go into customer meetings and go, I know the pain points you're going through, I've done it, here's my experience and that kind of thing. So that's a very rough overview of me up to Twistlock.
So you kind of went from I suppose client onto the other side of the fence to then back for the other team effectively and be the person pitching to the client. What advice would you give to people? Because there's typically, I've been doing startup recruitment for many years, and a lot of time that people bring these kinds of role in, they typically push back and say, well, that's a big company person, that's somebody who's used to working in big teams on the wrong side of the fence, as the phrases go. What advice would you give to somebody that's moving from in your case, Sky UK or some of the larger, blue chip companies that you work for, into that stealth environment? What's the biggest holy shit moment that kind of, that struck you?
So one of the things I hadn't recognized it until actually I made the jump the other way again. Into an enterprise environment. You forget just how many things there are, depending on the size of the startup, of course, the number of support things that are in place for people. And I don't just mean support as in HR, making sure that you're okay and that kind of thing. But I mean silly things like, oh, I need someone to help me organize doing a meetup. Okay, great. Well, in a startup, typically that's going to be you, and you're going to wear many different hats. And so I found it exhilarating coming into the environment where it was like, no, you can do that. Yeah, that's fine. You definitely collaborate with us. But when I started at Twistlock, I was only one in EMEA, but that also meant that the closest person I had to chat to from a technical side of things or from a management side of things were in America. So I had that time lag where, I had to just say, right, well, this is the right thing to do. I've worked it out. I can take it on the chin if it's the wrong thing to do, and progress with that. So I think I've seen some people who've gone into startups who go, I'm not sure I like this. I'm not sure that I can deal with that. And what I would say is that I think during if it was a candidate, I would say to them, have a think about what you like about your role at the moment. And if you're going into pre-sales as a technical person and you go, I love helping people, so I'm happy in front of customers. I love getting into the puzzles that the customer has, and also being able to say, that's not how I would do it, but okay, that's how you are doing it, so let's investigate. So if you say, okay, I'm happy with that, then the next thing I would say to somebody is to work out, are you happy standing on your own 2 feet and saying, well, I'll need to if something's not getting done, I'll need to step up and do it. Yeah. So I think, and those are sometimes the bits that people fall down on.
And what do you think it is from like from an emotional and cultural perspective, more perhaps than the actual day-to-day, well, I've got to do this myself. What did you find the most challenging about being in what at that time was a very highly regarded startup that was coming out of the Israeli tech community with a lot of funding behind it, a lot of hype around that technology at that time? What does it feel like to work in that kind of an organization where the pressure from the VCs is I can imagine, quite intense at times?
It's exciting if you like that type of thing. I mean, for me, the biggest mistake I made was not feeding back early enough when things were just getting too much. So we had, for covering EMEA, we had a lot of people interested in the technology. We had a lot of people wanting to try it out. We had a lot of people with that particular technology, with Twistlock, when we were focusing on container security. The whole containerization piece was very, very early on as well. So a lot of the times when we were going into, or I was going into pre-sales environments and trying to help someone with securing their containerized environments, a large chunk of it was also trying to help someone understand how to manage their containerized environment, because it's different from VMs and different from physical tin. So I found that the technical side of the pre-sales activities sometimes were quite involved, and generally were either with someone who needed their hands held a little bit to help them on with the technology, and then also securing it with the product, or it would be people who were so focused into the tech, they were living that it was then trying to navigate how they'd set stuff up. So I found that we were where you would think that, okay, if you do it in a sales cycle, if you're going to, from a technical point of view, not from a salesman's point of view, if you're going to come along and do an initial demo, understand through questioning what their environment is, they're going to go into a proof of concept. You're then helping with that proof of concept, and then any niggly details at the other end. I mean, it was a different way of doing things, because I know for one of our large financial services customers, we ended up getting written into the contract that I was attending a day a month on site to help them with stuff.
You got signed up.
Yeah, that's right, because they recognized that someone who'd done it before and knew the technology, and that was value. The downside of that is, instead of it being demo for an hour, a little bit of prep work, proof of concept for a little bit of time over 2 weeks, and then whenever the sale happens, it was a lot more intense than that. So I found all of a sudden that I was like, oh yeah, that's that customer in Germany, I need to deal with them, I need to deal with this. So I think the second part is to say to people, okay, you're in, you're having a good time, you're doing all of the work that is expected, and any additional that you can find, because you're really enjoying being in part of the startup. The other thing is to feed back, okay, well, these are the limits that I'm hitting. I can't keep working at that pace anymore. And I think there's a lot of startups on the one hand are really great, because they can change plans very quickly, and if they're well funded, they can say, oh, well, we're going to do this now. But they also, as you've mentioned, they've also got to show, this is the way the business is going, this is the exit that we intend to go for, here's how we're going to get there, here's our runway. So especially when markets get a little bit tighter, there's not always the ability to go, oh, we need another SE, great, let's hire one. Instead, it's okay, we've committed to keeping headcount at this level until this time. So it changes slightly depending on the startup, depending on the market, how that looks. But one of the great things about working in startups, flexibility. There's so much that people are, everyone's pulling in the same direction. It's not like it's not like a large enterprise where I've worked many times where yes, everybody wants to see the business succeed, but they've got different interpretations of what that means, and there's no benevolent dictator to cut through and make the decision, right? So. In my career, I think, speaking to the business contacts I've had, that I think we need to embrace change and be able to move rapidly and bring business development straight to production as fast as possible. Yes, that's what we want to do. CISO is then going to say, well, we've got to secure the environment because we're a very large, heavily regulated organization. So actually what the business wants us to do is have stability and audit passing and all this kind of stuff. And that's also true, as much as depending on which hat you've got on, whether you like it or not, it's also true. And then there'll be the ops guy doesn't want anything to change because it's just a call out for him at 4 a.m. or her. But that doesn't mean that they're wrong. They all do this. In a startup, though, because instead of it being, it's this team over here, here's their distribution list, email them or raise a ticket and someone will get back to you. Mm-hmm. Instead, it's people with the same responsibilities, but it's a name. So it's like, you need to speak to Julie about that. And so you can reach consensus a lot faster. So on the one hand, getting right back to the question, I realize I've gone off on one, but on the one hand, what's great, startups can move fast and change and make decisions fast. And so you might think they can do the same thing from a hiring point of view. Mm-hmm. Enterprises are much slower and don't make that as fast. But they've typically, actually, if they advertise headcount, they usually can see that through this. I know that there's a lot that recently have gone into hiring freezes, but usually that takes a lot longer for that to happen. So people sometimes don't realize the same struggles exist in the startup world where they may have committed to a certain number of headcount. In which case, if you're in that role and you're struggling or the pressure's up, you do need to talk to try and work out what to do.
How do you think? Because obviously you're referencing working with large financial institutions or regulated industries. As a starter, I can imagine one of the challenges that you encounter and everybody in the startup face is gaining credibility and gaining the trust of such a large regulated customer that you're going to still be a company in 12, 18 months, 24 months, because what they obviously don't want to then have to rip and replace, in that period of time thereafter because of the disruption to customers. How do you go about articulating to the, whatever customer you want to, reference, that look, we are a legit company. We are here long term. I suppose you almost have to sell the big dream above and beyond the technology to that customer as well. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And in fact, anybody listening who's ever had a pitch from a startup organization will know that it always starts off with, we are this company, we were founded this time, and that's how serious we are. The next slide will be, we've got lots of funding, so you're trying to tell people that you're going to be around for a little while. And then usually the third slide will be, look at all these big name customers we have. And because you're right, it's about establishing credibility. And that genuinely is something I've always felt is a key part of any role that I've been in, is to try and portray that, this is the reason why, I've been in enterprises my career. I can understand why this particular startup would work in an enterprise environment, and to bring some credibility to that role. And certainly, I would say that with Twistlock, that was interestingly more about the technology and the company to some extent, but it was to go, no, this isn't, someone hasn't just, like today, I suppose you might say, this is AI security. Someone's just jumped on a hype that's there and used some buzzwords. So I felt that in Twistlock, my main credibility building role was to go, no, technology works here. Let me show you how it works. Here's how you can test it yourself, rather than the company. I don't feel there was so much pressure on that. Maybe because it was an early startup. But then as startups grow, I think there is, and moving into sort of scale up territory, I think there is something there to then say, you need someone who's going to act at that director level or a senior level to be who has also done that role as well, to bring that credibility in, to go, we're not just technology and understand technology inside and out, but actually we also understand how organizations operate. So how decisions are made and why. We've probably all been there. Certainly, in my career, I saw it a lot when I was a techie on the coal face, as it were, going, why on earth would someone make that decision for budgets or for whatever? Because it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And sometimes you've just got to be extracted or work in that position. So I was fortunate enough to be the group CTO for a distributor. And being in that role, it was a lot more, in charge of IT for the whole globe, for the organization. And that's when you're making those decisions to go, this doesn't make any sense this quarter or next quarter, but actually this is building the foundations for next year. Or what I'm seeing coming down through the board or from the board through, the senior leadership team, that this is the direction we're taking. And whilst I can't tell everybody this is what we're going to do, because it's all hush hush and hey, it might change, I need to lay the foundations to be able to support that change in business direction. So those types of things where if I was to be coming in and being an SE or a sales engineer or solution architect, whatever, I would be more focused on, here's the technology, here's how the technology works, and by the way, we're a real company that's we've got the money, we've got the runway, we're and bringing that credibility in. I think at a certain stage you then shift to having to have someone who can say, we're not just here for the long term, we're not just here, we've kind of shown that now, we're slightly big enough to say that we're back enough and have enough partnerships to show that we're a real company. I think there's then that credibility of the product will work in an enterprise environment for how you want to operate, as opposed to the techies are happy. This needs to be something for everyone.
And I suppose that kind of leads quite nicely onto where you've transitioned to now, because as we said earlier in the call, you and I have known each other for some time now, and I've seen you go through the group CTO role from the technical director role at Prisma Cloud to now a role at what I would not consider a startup, perhaps more of a scaler, where I saw Orca come to market. The funding that they raised and kind of get to a level, whereas now you've joined as a principal tech evangelist, office of the CTO type schmoozer. So what's the differences? What's the nuances here between Twistlock, startup, just out of stealth? Whoa, this is a cool tech. This is new kid on the block. Whereas Orca Security now, I can imagine it's a different vibe. It's a different conversation you're having with people because the tech is established in the market. People know it, are aware of it. They're also aware of their competitors. What's the kind of the narrative now that obviously you're taking into a scale up such as Orca Security?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. For any time previously before joining, so when I was in that group CTO role, actually, one of the subsidiaries of Exclusive Networks were looking into bringing Orca in in order to do some distribution or not, or sales or resales, or they were just getting it for themselves. I can't remember. It's not that I'm trying to hide any business dealings. It was just, I can't remember what was, it might have been just getting into use as a security tool. But at the time, it was all the same thing that I heard quite a lot previously was around the side scanning technology, and there's no agents and agentless. And that was, if we come back to our story around, as a startup, that's you're proving the technology, you're showing that the technology is a game changer. And interestingly, now skip forward a year or so, and actually the conversations I hear are less around how that technically happens, because people have accepted that it works. So just exactly as you said, not only companies moved into a scale-up model, but also it's changed places a little bit because it's now no longer having to go, no, it does work. Here's how it works. Here's the technical details. And instead now going, well, kind of everybody accepts that it works because this is the way that you do that cloud native application protection platform. If I'm going to use my evangelism and try and get Gartner phrases in there, people accept that that's how it works. So now it's about going, and this isn't something that's just going to be. Well, the thing I hate is when things are bought as shelfware. That is something I've always struggled with throughout my career. So that's one of the reasons, or one of the things I really want to do in this role, is to not just get people interested in Orca, but actually people who are getting it to use it and love it. So for me, it's not just a pre-sales activity. This is about saying, no, this is a huge chance for everybody. It's a great it's a game changer as far as I can see, and very, very easy. So how do we democratize that access? How do we get people using it? How do I evangelize about that and spread that good news, as it were? But that's where at this stage in organization lifestyle, I would say that you do need somebody in that role, either whether it's developer relations, if you're more hitting that pure development community. Whether it's a field CTO, if you're looking at things, probably if you're less security minded, you might have that field CTO role. But the field CTO role and the DevRel field CTO evangelist roles, they cross over in a lot of aspects. I think the main thing, though, as we've said a few times, is you are now establishing the credibility of the process. How do you know? If it's people, process, and technology, then you've proven the technology at the startup level, and at scale up now, you're probably more looking at this is how this can be put into a large organization. This is how an enterprise can use it. It's always been enterprise product, but here's an understanding of how enterprises work and how that fits in. So there's that aspect of the changing the story to be of credibility around there. And I think the other reason why I'm lucky enough to have my role is that there's times where you want someone who's very technical, who's also got that bit of a bridge between the business and technology, which I hope, I like to think I have, and I certainly I'm trying to fashion my career as that. But even if it's not me, even if it's someone else, someone who has that should be lifted out from pure coalface work to also you still need to be very productive, and you still need to maintain your being technical, but actually you're dealing a lot more with the people in the process. Understand the technology, but how to put that in. So that's at this stage in an organization's life cycle, I would say that's needed. And maybe that's where then what would be the next stage? Well, I mean, in Palo Alto, when I was the technical director of the office of the CTO, that's probably that next stage when it's a bigger company and you have this. And at that point, though, you really are getting less and less technical because you're now doing that schmoozing an awful lot more. It's more about the golf course than it is about the technology. And so it's about finding that balance. So if you're recruiting for that role or you're helping get somebody into that role, then the advice I would have for that person is if it's a startup, it's unlikely to have that my role would exist. It would be more like an SE role that also did a lot of evangelizing. That's super. You're techie. Get that. Be customer facing technology. At a scale up, then I would say it's now more of a balance. It's now someone who not only is technical, understands the reasons why the technology makes sense in a business environment. I think that would be the next part. And then if it was a bigger organization, then the role would be slightly different. I think that's where you would have those technical directors or field CISOs, and they wouldn't even necessarily be called field ones. And then I would say that's a lot more perhaps about the Rolodex and who you know and what you know, and establishing that people side of things a lot more than the technology, although you'd still obviously technology.
So you've obviously now worked, I would say, across the spectrum of companies, startup, the blue chip companies, scale ups, Palo Alto, obviously a large organization. What would you say out of your experiences was the most demanding out of all of those? It can be from a lifestyle perspective, from a work-life balance perspective, from a mental exhaustion perspective. What do you think was the most demanding and tasking of the demographics?
They've all had different challenges in different ways. In Twistlock, when I first joined Twistlock, and I told John Morello this story many times, after 3 months, I was really feeling that imposter syndrome was really, really kicking in. And I told him later, I said, I dreaded, I thought he was going to sack me any minute. And it was only through talking that got through that. Then, skipping forward, the changeover from being acquired with Palo Alto Networks. Palo Alto Networks is a lovely company. I mean, I suppose technically a competitor of ours now, but I'm not going to, the people there who work there who I still like, it's not a personal thing there. Palo Alto was a great company. I found it very challenging. It was suddenly such a big company with so many different demands that I was like, all right, I've got a great idea. We'll do this. I know that's this other team that do that. Right. Okay. Well, we'll do this. No. Jim does that. He's already tried it. Well, what can we do? So that had its own challenges, and then enterprises before were kind of felt sometimes like a number. So that had its own challenges. And then when I was a group CTO, I found it was a great role. I'm really proud of everything that I achieved in those in that time. The looking after the people. Suddenly, you're a lot more responsible for, what was it, 30 or 40 people, and that was challenging as well, because you want to try and do the right thing for them. At the same time, you can't just give everybody a raise, so you've got its own challenges there. So was there one that was the most challenging? In different ways, some technical, some process, some personal. I mean, how do you I've worked from home for the past, gosh, it must be, about 8 years, something like that. So pre-pandemic anyway. But even then, I've still every so often in a new organization go, oh, it would be nice to have those water cooler conversations, or be in an office to make those personal contacts and get those. So it's all challenging in its own way. At the tail end of Twistlock, it was challenging because I was traveling, I don't know, 90% of the time, which I loved, but it was, then a bit of a challenge because I was using up all my favors for the school run and things like that. So they all have their own, I'd say they all have their own different challenges. If there was any advice I would give anyone, it's to try and talk as much as possible with those trusted resources. And I know that there's been times, well, as you know, that if things have been tough, it's like, hey, well, this is, I'm struggling here, buddy. And you've got the experience of that. In fact, there's a wonderful book that we should probably plug. But there's some real. What I'd say is, come right back to it and stop wittering on. There's people there, even if you don't think that they are, who do want to listen and do understand.
Yeah.
And certainly, I would say, anyone can ping me on LinkedIn, and I'll always listen to someone if they need to get something off their chest. But yeah, think of your support network, I guess. Then is what I'm trying to say.
I think it's a great point to kind of close on, in honesty. And from my perspective this year, I've been in 2 startups myself that I've started, one funded, this one bootstrapped. I think this year has been the most challenging of my career, and probably a lot of people's careers, in terms of how the climate has been, the economy around tech. And I've gone from having conversations with clients of mine who are CTOs, CEOs, founders, to talking about mental health, to having discussions where I'm giving guidance and I'm asking for guidance on mental health, on how to navigate this year. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, speaking now bloke to bloke, it's not something that's very common to us to reach out and say, I'm struggling, and I've formed new friendships with people now who have just said to me, I'm having anxiety in the middle of the night, I'm struggling to sleep. And these are people that run multi-million pound organizations, but they're just humans. And I think to be able to have the, I suppose, the courage to reach out to somebody and say, I'm struggling here, is a real, it's something that we should promote more. And it's something that, as you know, I'm very passionate about. So if anybody listening to this is in a startup, they're in a scale up, and they are feeling the burn that this year has put on a lot of people, to know that they've got people like you to reach out to, who have been through all of these different experiences. You've got some great experiences that you can lean on, how you've navigated your own mental health through these periods. And likewise, anybody's always welcome to reach out to me to talk about these things, because the startup ecosystem, let's call it the ecosystem, wherever you sit in that, as you well know, is extremely challenging mentally at times. It's extremely demanding all the time, especially if you have a family at home. Like you say, the school run, sometimes you have to forego your duties at home to put the startup first, which, a lot of people will disagree with. But if you're getting into a startup, unfortunately, there are certain things that you have to be willing to do and to sacrifice. And that comes at a price. And sometimes it can be your mental well-being. So what I would do is I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile. so that people can reach out to you, can connect with you if they want to learn more a bit about what you're doing with Orca. And if there's some CISOs listening who are interested in learning from you because you've got some great experiences, I'll put the link in there on how they can connect with you. But I think it's been great to talk. I could have spoke to you for another 2 or 3 hours quite comfortably. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. I think what we'll perhaps do is think about doing this again in a few months' time, and we'll concentrate on the scale-up element. I know we've talked heavily now about the startup element and what it feels like to be, in that Twistlock environment and how to be the first person in territory. But I think what you're doing now, the scale-up Orca, is pretty interesting. And there's a lot of experiences that we can tap into there, which people will benefit from. So look, it was great to finally get you, Ash. I'm glad that we've shared this time. If there's any closing kind of advice you want to give to anybody listening, now's the time, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for having me, Will. And yeah, I'd love to come back and blather. I could certainly chat for ages with you. I would, obviously we've not talked about Orca. That's not the reason for this. So thanks for mentioning Orca a couple of times there. But no, for me, the mental health challenges that happen sneak up on people because it's little by little that builds and builds, and oftentimes people will say, right, I can't cope anymore, or feel like they can't cope anymore, and they can't point to one single thing that's happened that's caused it, because it's a load of different things, from international conflict all the way through to not being able to do the school run. So reach out to Will or I anytime.
Brilliant. I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody listening will have appreciated what you've said as well, and I'll put the links in so people can connect with you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, you too, buddy. Cheers.
Cheers, dude. Bye.